Because open source made it easy for us to build software from 0 to 1. AI is helping us build companies from 0 to 1. The question that I'm really asking is, do we need to go from 1 to N? And when it comes to software, do we need to go from 1 to N when people can heavily customize their own software for their own needs and not need to use somebody else's software?
The Adversarial Podcast. Why you gotta be so adversarial? Adversarial. It's time to get adversarial.
All right, guys, welcome back. Good to be back on the air. Sunil, Mario, great to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Let's hear a little about what you guys have been up to. Sunil, have you been doing a world tour again, or are you finally back on the keyboard?
No, I'm off to Barcelona and Madrid and Portugal. So,
wow. If you don't mind me asking, I'm just curious, as a fellow startup founder, is that what percentage is that business related?
That is 0. That's a family.
Oh, good, because I'm like, am I missing out on just if you don't have the Spanish market, you're just nothing. Like,
yeah, that's right. That's where the action is.
Okay, thank you for not lying to me, because you would have made me feel serious FOMO. I mean, I still feel vacation FOMO, but not commercial FOMO.
Welcome to startup life, right?
Yeah, apparently, yeah. Mario, what's going on with you? What are you up to these days?
Well, today is my my last day at Ambit, at the company I've been for 9-10 months. I know it's pretty short time spent, but I had an opportunity to go join at a very early startup with my former boss at Snowflake, Sunny Betty. Still stealth mode, so can't share it, but I love the Ambit team. They're great people, great product. But I got the itch to go join my former boss.
Well, congratulations. That's great. I mean, I know exactly how you feel, and Ambit's a good crew. But you know what? 3 ex-CISOs turned founders, like all that stuff, like it's got to be complete 100%. So now we're back.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, good. I've been doing a little bit of travel. After RSA, I got back and then went back out to SFO this week. Jeez, time flies. And I was actually at a Cloudflare Advisory Council meeting in Sonoma, which was awesome. I mean, it was a no-brainer to go because I've done some stuff like that with them, and they always put on a great event. And like any of these events, when they bring together the peers and you get those conversations flowing, there's a lot of value, and that was totally true as usual. But that gives me a good segue into the first topic we collected here. So while I was out there, Grant Borzikas, the CISO, who does a lot more at Cloudflare than house security, as I call it, right? Because they're a cybersecurity company too. So he was sharing some information about a story that we collected anyway for the podcast, and that was about this takedown of, I'll say, Infostealer botnet. I thought that was really interesting. The biggest question I had was whether it's pronounced Lumma or Llama. If you guys have any impact. What I'm more curious about, like, you've both been around the block enough to see these big takedowns that get done by these big orgs like Microsoft and Cloudflare and Interpol, and they take a lot of coordination. How much does this change things? How much does this move the needle for you guys? Or do you think it will?
Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty strong statistical history of this, which is these takedowns create a small little dip, and then everything just bounces right back to where it was before. When it comes to takedowns, which is unfortunate, right? I think it's great that we're doing this, but what really actually moves the needle for a longer period of time is actual arrests. So if there's a physical action that's taken against the individuals that were behind this, then you actually see a real meaningful drop for a time until it restores itself. But usually, again, this was actually profiled. I forget, maybe it was I forget which book it was in, but they just bounce right back, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question for someone who hasn't been involved in one of these things intimately is, if you think that there's just thousands of cyber criminals who are all waiting in the wings and almost just competing for airtime, then you kind of whack them all, right? You knock one down, another one fills the vacuum, and it's all kind of pointless. But if arrests actually do make a difference, that means that there are finite criminal networks, and they have hooks, and you literally put someone in jail, and they just don't have the access to the keyboard, and that actually makes an impact. Is that true? Is it is it really just a small amount of key individuals that are making such a big difference everywhere, or make a big difference, a bad difference?
So if you want to actually get a better sense of that, there's a book called Darkwire by Joseph Cox, I think it was, that gives us perspectives on, again, how fast does the system restore back to normal, how many people are waiting in the wings, all that kind of stuff. And in the context of the book Darkwire, it was a story about the encrypted phone business. And when law enforcement took down one particular encrypted phone business, another one was pretty much waiting in the wings to pop up and take over the remaining business. That's actually how the FBI was able to run an encrypted phone business that became the most popular business for criminals to use, because they did a takedown and there was another one waiting in the wings to pick it up, which happened to be run by the FBI. By the way, it's a fascinating story. If folks haven't read it, it's worth the read. But anyway, the point being, not everything's of course run by the FBI, but who knows, right? In fact, that would be awesome if there was an Infostealer operation that was run by law enforcement, because that's where people will end up going to if there's one that's waiting in the wings.
I mean, I see two points. I mean, that's people. If you're listening to this show, Sunil's idea is brilliant. Somebody please take him on that offer. But I think if you look at, I thought there were two things I got from the article. But on one of them was it seemed to be associated to Russian gangs. I think that's what I heard, which maybe suggests that they are in Russia. Huh, man. Yeah. Look at that. Brilliant. And that makes it really hard to go get these folks when they're in countries that we don't have agreements with. If you look at, for example, what happened with the event that happened in Snowflake last year, and the perpetrators were, I think they were kind of arrested within less than 12 months. Why? Well, one of them lived in Canada. There you go. Right? So it makes it a lot easier when you have these agreements with countries. So that's one. And that's what I think continues to perpetuate this problem over and over, is that we don't have agreements with some of these countries where we can arrest these people. I think the other thing that I wanted to understand is they mention in the article that it was attributed to the Infostealers to pirated software and or people who were or people that were successfully phished. What I would like to know is, okay, so you got phish and you got pirated software. I would love to learn how much of this was attributed to pirated software, because phishing attacks we get, people will fall for phishing attacks, and they are victims, and I feel for them, and we should never shame the victims. But if you're using pirated software, I honestly want to take you to the back of the shed and take care of, do some things that you will avoid doing. I would like to know what that is about.
Yeah, I do know what you mean, because I hate when any of these analysts bundle two things that have there's no union of the data, and they're like one or the other. Well, which my favorite was the old Verizon data breach report. I say old because I don't think they did it in the last few years this way, but they would say attributable to stolen and or weak passwords.
Yeah.
It's pretty important to figure out which one of those it actually is. Yeah. Yeah. So Sunil, back to the point that you made on there. I mean, the vacuum getting filled every time one gets knocked down. I mean, the fact that the FBI was able to fill the encrypted phone vacuum is kind of, to me, almost like demand side. Like, we know that, so if one goes down, whether it was the FBI or was it an adversary, they're just saying there's enough demand that someone will fill in. Just like if you were to take a drug dealer off the street, someone's going to sell drugs. Why? Because people want to buy drugs. And that's very different from if it's a network, and if you can't get the people behind jail and they just pop up themselves, or the engineers are working on them, if it's an actual group of people. And do you think with this Infostealer stuff that there is a limit to a connected community of people, that if that whole community was isolated and frozen, right? You don't have to actually put them all in jail, but just scare the rest of them enough that they stop acting, that it would be an end to it, or is this just demand driven?
I think until you have arrests, and even then, it doesn't necessarily scare away the perpetrators. I think if there is a silver lining, if I were to be a little bit more optimistic on this, it would be simply that we now have more insight on who is actually compromised and potentially why. And maybe to Mario's point, if it does turn out it's because of pirated software, oh dang, then not much sympathy for the losers there, so to speak. But I think just understanding that was the vector is good to know. If it wasn't because of that, boy, sure, we'd love to know what those other vectors are, who's getting compromised. And if the burden is on, let's say, for example, residential providers I'm sure there's a lot of residential users that are affected. Are there ways that maybe the residential ISPs can do something about that as well? We don't know. But the data, now that we have direct control over who's beaconing back, it will give us more insights on how to thwart it at scale.
Yeah, and you know what? If it is whack-a-mole, and it turns out that it's taking us down only has a limited amount of benefit, then hats off to Cloudflare and Microsoft and everyone who keeps whacking, because one way to deal with that in the short term is to keep on making these windows of, these
shorter and shorter. Yeah.
Yeah, make them, and just keep them going and keep on whacking and keep on taking down whoever pops up, and they're doing God's work there. So good.
I mean, and the pirated stuff, the pirated software. I mean, the big point for me on that is we work so hard in security, and we really do, and people. We're trying to espouse good practices, and I generally think employees want to do the right thing, but when you're doing pirated software, man, honestly, that's just unforgiven. Don't do that. Don't do pirated software, please. Pirated movies, please. I'll send you $10. Email me. I'll send you $10 for that movie if you can't afford it.
So now that you mention that, right? When I was... God, if I was going to say when I was 18 or something, there was some point where the only way to get binaries was in news groups. If you guys remember that, right?
Yeah.
And you have software to stitch it all together so you could get Photoshop, in 8 days from now, it's going to finally be downloaded. And, right. But, and then there was the LimeWire age and the Napster age and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I heard MP3s, I don't know if it was literally the first one, but I remember that's how I learned about the band The Prodigy. It was just at that time, and then they popped, and it was 1995, 1996, and MP3s were equivalent to that. And all of my music was pirated MP3s. I was doing graphics with pirated CorelDRAW. I know it's embarrassing. I was using that. I was, everything. It was all kinds of pirated stuff all over the place. And I don't use that stuff anymore. And I think part of it, this is what I'm wondering, part of it is because I finally got a job and can make enough money to afford to buy stuff. The other part of it is that I feel like it would be 80% certain that if I downloaded a couple gig pirated binary, that there would be malware in it. I'd almost be disappointed if there's not. And I don't feel like that was true in 1996.
Yeah.
I think that's changed. Am I right, or do I just have money?
Well, it's now harder to tell, right? Yeah, because you can embed so many things, and it's hard. Even if you knew that there was malicious things in it, finding it is extraordinarily hard. But I would, I would joke and say, a lot of software now requires you to log in, and so if you nowadays if you want to pirate, you just steal people's credentials.
Oh, that's so true. Yeah. Yeah,
Don't listen to him.
No, it's not pirated. It's fully legit. It's licensed. It's just it's just Sunil's license.
I don't doubt that many of the Infostealer folks are using the credentials just because for the pure purposes of, hey, I want to use a CorelDRAW or Adobe Creative, whatever it is, and not have to pay for the license, right?
Yeah. Well. Another big story happened in the interim here. So switching gears a little bit into Coinbase, and so there was a little 1-2 effect on this where we all heard. I guess it was on Thursday of last week that Coinbase suddenly popped out and said 8K filing. in alliance with SEC regulations on notifying shareholders of something that might potentially have a material impact. Video out of Brian Armstrong on Twitter, a blog that they posted. So this kind of blitz of info out of Coinbase, and what it basically said was that they had been extorted, attempted extortion from people who socially engineered some of their overseas customer support agents. I have not heard mention of where that country was. I'm not sure that's super material. But that they had compromised these people by paying them off, the adversaries had, and they had gotten them to share customer info, and then were using that to target customers directly for fraud, and then also extorting, and this is where it all fell apart, when they extorted Brian Armstrong, and he got on and basically pulled the Mel Gibson in Ransom in that movie, where he basically said, you want $20 million, you're not going to get a penny of it, and we're going to turn it into a $20 million bounty for any information leading to the conviction of these criminals. I saw that, read through it pretty quick, and put together the data and just thought, this looks really good to me in the response. Partly that they controlled all the messaging channels right away, so you didn't have this telephone effect and people getting, cross channels on the message. I thought that was really strong. I thought the 8K was awesome in that it was, I think I had counted up, I think it was less than 800 words, which takes a lot of confidence to be brief. It didn't meander on so that they could defend anything they said in court later on. It was directly to the point. The estimated cost to them was a very wide range. Oh man, I wish I had it in front. I think it was $80 to $140 million or something like that. So it's a pretty wide range, but they had everything baked in there, and I thought it was a really strong response, contrasted with some where people have been a little more evasive or been late to disclose and that sort of thing. And then, of course, there were some detractors who came out and felt the opposite and nitpicked that they could have done better and that this isn't good enough. Do you guys have an opinion on how this was handled so far?
All right. So, okay. Here's my question. What does stand your ground in cybersecurity look like? Okay. And the notion of stand your ground. For those who longtime listeners, you know that Jerry feels pretty strongly about banning ransomware payments, right? And by the way, I generally, even though we may have disagreed, I generally support that. But I think it needs to be coupled with other options that an organization can take. So in other words, if you're going to ban it, then let me use the $20 million ransomware payment that I'm being asked to give and maybe pay that as a bounty, right? And the bounty here, Brian is offering, hey, any information leading to the arrest of these people. But let's go further. Let's think about, what does stand your ground mean? It means that you actually have a gun. I don't know. But the point is that again, this is definitely pushing the boundaries. Okay, so I'm floating it there. But what if the boundary were instead, hey, whoever can hack back and retrieve the content that was stolen, or in the ransomware case, get me at the decryption key, wipe out what they stole, destroy their operations. Okay, and again, this is I'm going really on the deep end here. I don't think it's anyway. But the perspective here is that the government has to either let us pay the ransom or strike back, right? So if we're going to ban something like ransomware, then give us the opportunity to strike back. And this is a slightly less aggressive version, okay, of striking back. But you can think of some more aggressive ones as well. And I would think that the Trump administration is they're very. It seems like they would be very in favor of such an option. But if we were to strike back, we just need the appropriate safeguards and safe harbors to allow for this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't agree that those are kind of at odds, or that if you're going to ban ransom payments, you have to allow or actually affect some kind of strike back. I mean, let's play that out. If they said, okay, no ransom payments are allowed, I still argue this wouldn't even happened. But it would be the same thing even more commonly. It would be, we're going to do a $20 million bounty because we're not allowed to pay the ransom, which would pretty quickly wrap it up. But as far as striking back, and I'm digging into this because hackback comes up a lot and it gets a lot of political attention. Like, I've seen Congress reps talk about that, and if you're not technically astute, it gets stupid real fast, and people have no idea what they're talking about. Like, so if Coinbase were, one version of that is $20 million bounty, and are vigilantes allowed to go hunt down the bounty by breaking the law or whatever and then claim it. It's no different than my bike got stolen and I'm going to offer a $2,000 bounty on that. You go find the bike, that's great. If you broke down someone's door to do it, you're rolling the dice. And depends on how hard you broke it down, whether or not that person is going to sue you at your own risk. That's true in this too. I mean, right? There's some people who could vigilante their way to finding these people, definitely. And if so, they're rolling the dice and they need to figure out whether or not it's worth it for them. I don't think any legal changes are needed for that. But for Coinbase to hack back, I don't, even when I was a CISO, people asked about it all the time, don't you want to hack back? Don't you want to hack back? No, I mean, what does that even mean? What would Coinbase even do? Where would they start?
Well, let's go back to the, get my bike back. So it's not just to get my bike back, or in the case with Coinbase, or a ransomware issue would be, get me the decryption key, and give me assurances that the attacker no longer has my data.
The attacker no longer have your data. We've all been in those situations where you want to get some kind of affirmative affidavit so that you can justify not going public, right? This happened kind of with Joe Sullivan and the Uber thing to some degree too. That really tested it. Right? They got this assurance. Well, we didn't have to go public with this because we were sure they weren't, because they signed it, and then it's like, well, but they're criminals, and can you trust the signature, and that kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know that with all the air cover in the world that you're going to be able to say, well, I went in and deployed wiper malware on a system, so therefore I'm not going to have to meet my regulatory obligations.
I agree on that. I mean, because copying is easy, right? So but you get something that implies that I want you to do something that may result in their operation no longer being sustainable.
Sunil's going on vacation when he's being a little frisky like this today, right? So good for you, man. I'm glad.
Yeah, I'm loving it too, Mario. I agree.
You know what I mean? But okay, look. Kudos to Coinbase. Awesome. That's exactly what you need to do. How you comport it yourself. I mean, not exactly, but it's the right approach. Quick, precise, and instead of paying the ransomware, you're going to pay somebody to go find them. Good for you. And when you can just, like Jerry said, when you can read something that's less than 800 words that you don't even need ChatGPT to read, well done, my friends. Well done. Okay. So all I can do is applaud their actions.
All right. Well, we're in agreement on that. There were a few people that gave him a bad letter grade on this whole response, and I think that's just, some people are never satisfied with anything. But yeah, I think this is something to learn from for sure. And by the way, we talked X episodes ago about transparency, and we basically said you can only do transparency if you have your house in order, right? Otherwise, transparency is counterproductive. Yeah. And so I do think one of the best things about this was that they were completely transparent, but they only could have been that transparent because they had built such a program over so many years.
And Coinbase, we know the CISO there. I think all of us know him, and he runs a pretty tight ship at Coinbase when it comes to security, and it's something I think they've done some videos on some of their security programs and what we can learn from them. I think we can all learn from that, and I think, Jerry, you're absolutely correct. It's the ability to have that kind of visibility and understanding your environment that quickly. It's helpful.
Yeah.
But by the way, there's always the human factor. It was somebody that they were that became the conduit.
Yeah. Yeah, and when people come in and react to this like, oh, you should be humiliated because you had an insider, so clearly you don't have a good enough insider threat program. You don't do good enough background checks on in Manila, all the support reps or whatever. Like, that's never gonna move the needle on this at all. Like, better interview question: would you never take money to give up our secrets? Yes. Okay.
Brian did say that he's going to pull back from certain international locations. So.
Oh, he said that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If I remember, and by the way, I checked, so apologies for not having done the homework on that one. It was 180 to 400 million. That was the wide range of potential damages that they reported, which is pretty interesting. But if I remember right, he said they're going to scale back to some degree on some international roles. I don't think he said on some locations. Like, it wasn't like, oh, that location's bad, but rather just revisit the whole idea of what are we offshoring and what we aren't. And it only makes sense you have to do that. I mean, I think that's just like prudent, like board level, you'd say, hey, let's do a review. But as far as coming public with that piece of it, look, there is some macro benefit of, there's a whole industry for every one of these offshoring locations that's doing economic development and economic promotion, right? They're probably here in Atlanta. There's probably some people from literally from Manila right now saying, hey, have you considered Manila? You should consider Manila, and here's why. And when those people hear someone publicly saying, we're pulling back because of this, I think that's important because it may influence later on the, all the way down the chain locally of, look, when you go and do something like this and take some money, you ruin the economy for everyone involved. And that gets more eyes out of local law enforcement in those countries. They get people cracking down more on it. And that does improve things, despite the human rights abuses that local governments might go through in order to affect this. But that's another episode. Yeah. He had 25 people imprisoned without due process thanks to Brian's tweet. Hopefully that's not a fallout. All right, everybody wants me to talk about MCPs. Everybody talks to me about MCPs, MCP security companies. Seriously, I don't know about you guys, but I've gotten so many inquiries over the past 3 weeks, actually, from venture and beyond about new security startups and all of that. But that's not why we're bringing it up. And model control plane in AI is what we're talking about, just to be clear here.
Protocol.
Model control protocol. So we have an article on the screen here about some rogue, I don't know if agents, packages, what would be the right word to use. What happened here? And is this indicative of some kind of trend? Is this unique to MCP integrations, or is this just a technology trend now?
Oh, well, as far as technology trend, I mean, it's the whole trend is around agentic AI, and MCP is just one of the protocols associated with how we interact with agents and agents amongst agents and the agents with the tools that they're using. So, just to, for those who aren't, I'm sorry, if you're already familiar with some of these concepts, then apologies for the primer, but this is how I understand a lot of the differences. So think of, and I'm going to anthropomorphize it, you know the word. Anyway.
We're going deep, Sunil. We're going deep, man.
So imagine you hired a whole bunch of interns, okay? And each intern, so you've hired 100 interns, and each intern speaks a whole different language. Furthermore, each intern needs to touch a whole bunch of different tools. So the language that is used to communicate between the intern and the tool to say, hey, for this particular tool, here's how to make use of this tool. Here's the features of the tool. That language is MCP. The language between agents, so you have one agent that you have one intern that speaks German, the other intern speaks Italian. How does a German intern and a Italian intern communicate with one another if they don't know the corresponding language? They use English. But anyway, there is a language, a protocol, and that's A2A, Google's agent-to-agent protocol. Then OpenAI has something called function calling, which is very similar to, in my view, the MCP.
Yeah.
But the fact that OpenAI is adopting MCP and basically saying that that's going to be the standard means that for function calling, being able to say, here's the tools, here's how to interact with different tools, that's going to be the standard. The MCP is going to be the standard. Then there's a whole other protocol, which is, how do I, as a human, communicate with these agents? And there's a agent communications protocol that just got released by IBM that helps me to communicate with an intern. And so there's a whole bunch of different protocols that are emerging. What's really fascinating of course, is how do you know that one of these interns isn't also North Korean, okay, or isn't a mole that was planted in your organization, or somehow, got a wrench and knocked over one of your interns and, said, hey, I'm this person, right? And so what you have all these, tool servers. Actually, that's probably not the right example. I guess you have all these tools that are being used by these agents. How do you know that the tool is the right tool? How do you know that the descriptions for these tools are correct and that they're valid for how you're supposed to use the underlying tool itself? And that's what's happening right now. We just don't have a way to authenticate that.
I'm going to, I don't know if you folks have looked at this MCP FAQ and documents on how to set it up and all. And so obviously I'm embracing, this whole OpenAI stuff. So I'm excited about it. First page, and I don't know if I said this on the previous episode, but if I haven't, let me just tell you how you set it up. And it's documented. It says, go and create an API key and put in your environmental variables to be able to authenticate these things. And I'm like, are you freaking... Now, okay, maybe because I've worked at a NHI IAM company, Mbit. I'm like that. I hear that stuff and my hair grows gray. Like, you can't be doing that. That's the worst place to be putting this. So I guess my bottom line on this point is the stuff is still being created. We're still creating the standards. And I think there's going to be some hiccups along the way. And will improve. But I also think we're going to see a lot of the stuff that we've experienced in the past. We're going to experience it here, just because it's OpenAI. I think some of the errors that we've done over and over, certainly credentials, are just going to be repeated again, unfortunately. Yeah. Just a different flavor.
Yeah. Well, the reason this came to our attention this week is there are some malicious packages that were. And if you install, a malicious package, it might do the right job, but also intercept your credentials and send them to a malicious party or something like that. And I think that the bottom line is just you need more and more to, I hate to say zero trust because that's how people are kind of selling this a lot, but you need to observe the behavior of things more than, and kind of from an allow-less perspective. So what are the things these packages reaching out to? And yeah. So what about so on a related note though, what happened with Cursor and the IDE here? Got another story I'm looking at.
Well, I mean, it sounds like the developers on Cursor, the folks using Cursor, the developers were downloading node packages, I believe, and somebody just posted them out there with similar names to the legitimate ones. And it tricked people into downloading these things. And once they were downloaded into your IDE, there you go, off to the races.
Yeah, and the AI hook here is pretty negligible, right? I mean, the AI hook here is that AI is popular, but there's other things you could put in an IDE, and the more popular you are, the more likely you are to get lookalike name typo squatting and that kind of thing.
So there are a couple of things here. The NPM is so there's dependency hell with NPM, so there's all these different dependencies and such. But one interesting thing that's happening is if you're asking Cursor, if you're asking the LLM to write code for you, sometimes it may create a package that doesn't exist. But what we're seeing is people starting to proactively create packages that might be hallucinated, and when people don't pay attention to it properly, you'll get basically a attacker-owned package just because you're asking Cursor to generate that for you. And it's not just Cursor; it's any LLM that you're asking to do coding. So it's the ability to know that this package actually is legitimate is one of the key problems that we have here.
But this reminds me of coding when I was coding in Python, PyPy, right? PyPy,
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the same thing, right? It's just like I keep mentioning, just because it's OpenAI, it's just that's the new thing, and we all, oh my goodness, this is so different, et cetera, et cetera. But the same human errors continue to happen. The same way things that we keep tripping over and over, it just keep repeating themselves. This NPM just reminds me of something I seen 5 years, 10 years ago.
So what happened in the past is more typo squatting type of issues.
Yeah.
The nature of this is it's not quite typo squatting. It's hallucination squatting, I guess. I'm not sure. That's not a thing, but essentially that's what's happening in some of these things. That will end up with a hallucinated package. And can you predict the likelihood of that package name? And the reality is, yes, you can, right? In fact, I mean, I'm sure if you were just to say, hey, ChatGPT, give me a list of potential NPM packages that use very common, naming patterns. And if you were to register all these packages, and then basically wait for Cursor or Windsurf or something to make up such a package, I would say it's a non-trivial probability that you'll get a hit at some point.
You should trademark the thing, though, by the way.
Hallucination squatting?
Yeah, I think you should trademark. Somebody quickly get on it.
Yeah, I think you do that in New Mexico, right? You could have a camp somewhere out in the
Delaware.
desert. Hallucination squatting. Yeah, $2,500 a day. That sounds pretty good. Hey, on a related note, there was Socket, arguably a package security firm. Researchers at Socket, and I don't know if they have a research department of people that are just doing research.
Yeah.
But as you might expect, they published, they found some malicious packages that the way they described it was they had like date triggered time bombs, and they would be and they've been sitting around for 2+ years, and they brought a lot of attention to that. Is that do you think a security are they conflicted to be the ones to bring this news to you since they have the solution?
So I'm actually pretty familiar with the company. For us, is a huge contributor to the NPM ecosystem. So he's the founder of the company. But I should note that the previous NPM issue that we just discussed with Cursor was also found by the same company, by Socket as well. What I think is more interesting about this one is, to the exact point around he created this company to look for these kinds of things. And his company's been around for, I'm pretty sure, more than 2 years. So why was it only discovered now, right? So you have a company that's explicitly trying to find compromised malicious packages, and only now did he discover it. And so I think that points to a couple things. One is it's hard to do, right? If you have a company that's specifically focused on this and yet they missed it for the last 2 years, that's noteworthy. And then the second thing is, like, the question is, like, how did they do it? And ultimately what we should expect is people who are trying to bypass those type of detection mechanisms will introduce similar sort of ways to make it more undetectable. In this particular case, it was like a time. There was a sort of like a detonation timer of sorts. And I'm not sure if that's what caused them to miss it for a while. But anyway, the point being, we should expect attackers to start seeing more ways to bypass some of these ways that we've been able to detect maliciousness within packages, and ultimately get bypass and be able to be more successful in delivering them into our code without us being winning, while being unwitting about it.
Yeah. Well, you know, when it comes to AppSec, like open source software is kind of treated differently than in a traditional AppSec program than homegrown software, right? Where software developed by your company, there's a whole stack that people often apply in AppSec, starting with like SAST and reviewing, maybe even with IDE plugins and reviewing the actual code syntax, and does this look risky, and DAST and testing things out, and then ultimately through even bug bounty. But when it comes to open source, SCA is usually the injection point in the AppSec stack, right? Source composition analysis. But what that's really done, in my experience in the past, is take packages that are going to be built with and check them against a known registry of packages that are known to have security vulnerabilities. It's not for malicious. It's not for bad logic. It's for, the company came out, or sorry, the developers came out and said, yeah, we had a bug there. Someone took advantage of it. We've patched it. Here's a new version. And SCA says, you're still on the old version. You need to upgrade that. But what we don't do with open source software is SAST. Like, we don't take it in and actually scan the code itself proactively. Like, we count on the developers of it to let us know when there was a problem, or really we count on the adversaries to pop it and then that become public and then them to fix it. And I don't know of any, when it comes to like evaluating homegrown software, every tool I've worked with and I can think of is looking for security weaknesses, defects, things that could result in compromise and exploitation. But I don't know of any tools that are focused on looking for malice, for Easter eggs, or worse, like backdoors. And I'm not sure it should, because I mean, the minute I say that, I'm sure there's like 4 venture capital firms that are listening right now, and they're like, boom, let's go. I've got this, this lame duck here that I'm going to have pivot into that space tomorrow, and we're going to convince the whole world that this is what's needed. I'm not sure that is worth a massive investment looking for
private equity,
code.
man, private equity.
But right, but if we had that kind of tool, then it would make more sense to apply that to open source than the defect checkers.
Well, let me offer, I might have mentioned this in a prior episode, but let me go back and undermine or challenge the notion of open source at all, right? So first is the belief that open source tends to be more secure and bug-free because there's more eyeballs on it. We now have machine eyeballs. Could you argue that closed source is potentially more secure? Okay, so that's one. 2, why do we actually need open source at all? Open source is allowing us to basically not have to rewrite code that that someone else has written, right? But guess what? We now have these things that can write code for us. So what if we just say, hey, I need these kind of features or functions, and it's represented in these open source packages, but I don't actually want you to use those open source packages, okay? And so therefore, you end up really having extreme customization, okay? And extreme customization, like when I say customization here, I mean like code that is distinct to just your app and no other person's app. That type of code is much harder to attack because you now every attacker has to like figure out how your application works, and it doesn't matter that if OpenSSL has a vulnerability, your implementation might be completely different, such that you can no longer attack it in the same way.
Yeah, I think I'm totally feeling what you're saying here, and so to play it back for test, and maybe I did get it and other people will get it, and after I say it a different way. Growing up in the 90s and onward, I mean, growing up like professionally and being ready to being employed by then, my muscle movement and yours also is probably like I run into a challenge. Like let's say I wanted to automatically print while we're talking. Like I literally want to have a printer over your dot matrix for fun. And this is printing out the transcript as we're going. How would I tackle that problem? This sounds like an interview question, right? And I first think like, okay, I need to get a running audio file of us, and then I need to run that to an engine that takes audio file and makes transcripts out of it. I'm immediately Googling for that. And I'm going to find 7 different open source products that take audio files and make transcripts. I know that. I'm going to pick the one that's like, second from the top or something like that, and download it and run it. And to your point, in the future, I won't Google for it. I'll just prompt, hey, drop me a binary that takes us an input live stream audio and makes transcript on the other side.
Not drop me a binary.
Create
compile
a binary.
For me, create the code and compile for me a binary that only works that is very distinct to you.
Let's do it. Yeah, I totally. That's what I meant. Right? Yep. It's interesting.
I think what's going to end up happening now is, okay, let's say Sunil's right. Let's just agree. Yeah, you're right. It's going to make it harder. But the attackers are going to find the common thread, and they're probably going to go after the IDE potentially. So what if your code is unique and you cannot exploit it because it's so unique? But if you can get into the plumbing early on that's used by everybody else, right, then, well, why don't I just infect it through there? I think that's where the attacks are going to go.
Well, hold on. What's the IDE in an AI-driven world? The IDE is the chat interface.
Yeah.
Oh, why would I need an IDE? But your point is still valid, which is ultimately what we're doing is we're narrowing the attack, the paths that an attacker can take. And right now there's a lot, right? Every open source package out there, every NPM package out there is a potential attack path. And we're basically saying, well, we're going to consume, and anyone who's compiled an NPM program knows there's tens of thousands of packages that you're pulling in. Yeah. Every one of those is an attack surface, and that's why for us ended up creating this company Socket. But what if you can just eliminate that again? Just what if our ability to use these tools to code allows us to just use those patterns and say, just build it from scratch.
Yeah, I what you're saying resonates a lot with me, and I'm not even thinking about the security implications of it, because Mario's right, and where there's a will, there's a way, or whatever. But I don't even care about that. To me, the headline that you're saying is maybe open source software won't be as prevalent or important, and the demand will drop off in the future. Whether it has security implications or not, it's just all by itself. It's an atomic headline. It's very interesting. The thing that it makes me think about is when, for the last 30 years, I would go and say, I would Alta Vista or Google my way into, is there a piece of software that does this? And the answer was always yes. There was always 6 or 7 of them that were created. It's amazing. And that's not a new phenomenon. Like 20 years ago, you could find software that did anything that you could dream up. And somebody had already written it in 3 different flavors. And what always fascinated me was the people that are doing that. I mean, it's really free. They were really spending untold hours, like founder hours, for free to build all these open source, whatever the software is. And so if the demand dries up for that, what are those folks now generating finished companies instead of little libraries, because they're prompt engineering and getting cutting to the chase? And
well, my adage on this one was, it's open source made it easy for us to build software from 0 to 1.
Yeah.
AI is helping us build companies from 0 to 1. And the question that I'm really asking is, do we need to go from 1 to N? And when it comes to software, do we need to go from 1 to N when people can heavily customize their own software for their own needs and not need to use somebody else's software? And likewise with a company, what does scale mean in the new AI era when you could actually have extreme customization of everything that we do? And I don't know what that looks like. There is going to be different types of scale, and whatever scale that is, to Mario's point, you could attackers can attack that. But I would also argue that the opportunity to the idea of intelligence at democratizing intelligence enables us to tap that intelligence and build things that are highly customized just to our specific needs. And I don't need to necessarily borrow somebody else's or pay for somebody else's intelligence in building something that and using whatever they built.
Yeah.
I think I know, but anyway, yes, we should. But I'm just going to continue to say that yes, Sunil's dream is potentially there. But as long as we're having these frameworks that we have to communicate with each other, and the software needs to communicate with another piece of software somewhere else, that glue can be exploited and will be exploited. People are just going to go to the low-hanging fruits.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the implications for cyber are super clear either way. But hey, let's talk about this tie-up here with Jony Ive and Sam Altman. And what's I mean, the numbers are ridiculous, right? $6.5 billion for a pre-revenue. It was a pre-revenue?
Yeah, well, it's only a year-old company, so it's interesting.
No customers.
Yeah,
that's right.
But what I thought was interesting, there are 2 events that happened this past week that were interesting. One, of course, being that OpenAI bought this company called I/O, and then Google's I/O conference. And what's interesting to note in both is Jony's objective is to make AI more accessible, usually and given his history, in the form of a physical device or something that makes it really approachable and usable across a wide population. And what we saw also at Google's I/O event was the Android XR glasses. So this is really just fast forward to the latest iteration of Google Glasses, and it's much more capable, much more powerful, really fascinating. But the whole question that we should be asking ourselves is, what are some of the core assumptions that we've made about the nature of our perimeter and our security that we've said, you know what, we're going to risk accept this because people forget things. people don't have a perfect, memory. People don't have, photographic, a way to, they don't have photographic memory. When they see something, they can't necessarily always remember what it is. Okay. Well, we now have something like the XR glasses, which will pretty much record whatever you want. And in the demo that Google did, they said, "Oh, hey, what was that? What was on that mug that we saw about 3 minutes ago?" And Google Glass went and said, "Hey, oh yes, it was from this particular company." So it's kind of interesting, right? That notion of being able to recall something that you might have seen a long time ago. But anyway, the point is with what Jony Ive is doing with OpenAI is really going to be an acceleration of that, where more and more of these consumer level devices will be available at mass scale. And I believe that they're going to fundamentally undermine our core assumptions about what the nature of a corporate perimeter is, because now you have these things that will easily escape that. Because we have, for example, DLP is the most obvious sort of concern. And right now, any of our DLP controls that don't account on the forgetfulness of humans is no longer going to be a valid assertion or a valid assumption.
Well, I like that. Give us an example of a DLP control that counts on the forgetfulness of humans.
Hey, do you see my developer uploading some of those secrets on Slack yesterday? Man, that guy needs to be taken, be taught a lesson here. Imagine somebody recording that all the time and then sharing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, just even the fact that we consider that we have password managers, and the password managers are creating this complex password that you're not meant to remember. Okay.
Now you do.
And at any point in time you see the password, you've now remembered it.
Forever. Yeah. You're right. What I can't help but think about is that as that becomes ubiquitous and, the 80% of the productive workforce all has augmentation, let's just say in that regard, then it becomes less of an asset to be able to remember and recall things without augmentation. Maybe we even evolve away from that and adapt and lose short-term memory. I don't even know. I think it's great for me, though, because I've been really bad at remembering stuff for years. So I'm starting to lose my disadvantage. So I'm all in. Yeah.
There's a Black Mirror episode about the hazards of that, too. Like what if everyone did have perfect memory from being able to record things, what sort of chaos would ensue? I forget what the episode was, but it was one of the early ones.
But just to post, the adversarial, just the amount of sheer information that you would have to store, that these agents would have to store somewhere and process. Right now, just thinking about how much information we'd be able to capture, that requires some sort of utilities place that's going to give you enough energy to be able to support this. And right now, we don't have that. These AI agents, all these great ideas that we're supposed to be doing, we just don't have the electricity right now available to support this. And what you're talking about is storing more information. It has to go somewhere. It has to be processed. And that requires not just storage, but it requires basic electricity. And we don't have that.
I don't know. I think... there was an article somebody recently shared with me. It was called, Sunil will know this because he'll know everything. It was called Do Things That Don't Scale. Right. And it was more about founders and about the idea of kind of like manually overextending yourself and don't feel bad because that doesn't scale, because in the end it's going to work out and you're going to build the right patterns and channels and burn through things that you don't really and figure out what's good and what's bad, And I remember talking to David Ulevich, right? He was the founder of OpenDNS and sold it to Cisco, and now he's a A16Z partner. And I remember talking to him like in the garage, so to speak. They had this awesome office in San Francisco in the early days, OpenDNS, and I was out there for a customer advisory thing. And we were nerding out about some use case that we had and I needed help with. I don't remember what it was, but it was a big data thing, right? So it was probably something like passive DNS or something like that, because that was in their wheelhouse and that's a big data thing. But I remember brainstorming with him, and I was contributing the thought of a way to optimize and like, well, here's a way we could build this and not have to store a lot, because storage is expensive. Like to Mario's point, like, and I know you don't want to store a lot. And he looked at me, and David's great about this. He looked at me like, I don't care. Well, why would I possibly not care about storage? No, storage is free, and it's going to get freer tomorrow, and orders of magnitude. And that changed my worldview. And I think, unfortunately, Mario, that's the answer with the types of bets people put in venture every day on people, on ideas, all of that. Taking a bet on fusion isn't that far-fetched. Taking a bet on unlimited energy is happening.
You're right, but let's again. I think Sunil's point is correct. It definitely is going to be challenging, but we keep talking about all these agents doing X and just growing and just becoming even more powerful. I've seen some TED talks about the big problem is energy. And there is no place in the world right now, and I know you're talking fusion, but it's not tomorrow. Fusion is not tomorrow. I mean, we still don't have enough nuclear plants to do this thing. We lack the energy, the juice to power these things. And it's not the storage problem, it's the processing problem becomes a problem. You know, how are you going to
let me use a different metaphor for it.
Yeah.
You know, think about how much happens client side nowadays, right? Which is kind of ironic because we went from client server apps to completely the cloud, and everything's going to run there. So we could have remember the net devices and the network is the computer. And we were all going to have these stupid little devices.
Sun? Was that Sun?
Yeah.
Remember the Sun box? You remember that?
Yeah, and all the dumb terminals, right? I mean, a lot of big orgs started piloting. They went 20% dumb terminal, whatever it's going to be. And if you think about the workload that's put on a browser these days and the amount of processing, and WASM is delivering binaries down to clients and all that, we reversed course. And it wasn't like, oh, cool, there's a lot of client-side processing, therefore we can deliver more to the client. If you think about it, really it was, there's not a lot of client processing, but let's just put that demand on there, and I bet it will show up. And Apple and others, I mean, it was stupid to be building client-side hardware and a lot of capability because apparently you didn't need that. But it got driven by initially sloppy and bad code, but it caught up. And it's the same way with what you're talking about in processing. And I think a lot of people have the mindset of, if we build the demand, someone will figure out how to satisfy it. And for better or worse, it's probably true.
Have you looked at your iPhone recently and how much juice, the more applications you run, how much your battery doesn't last as long? And again, some TED talk, there's another TED talk, is the hardware is improving, but the software, we're sloppy at our software. We're not efficient with our software.
But that's the whole promise is that you could be sloppier and sloppier and that the hardware will make up for it. I mean, my Windows NT 4.0 box in 1999 was awesome. It did everything I ever needed. It didn't need anything anymore. And that was because Java wasn't out yet, or wasn't ubiquitous on there. There wasn't JVMs running crap. And then there was, and everything was slow. And then we got better hardware to run the crappy apps. And the cycle continues. Yeah, so here comes AI.
I think Voyager 2 is operating on, 50 watts of energy.
Yeah.
And made it out to... out the solar system. So
yeah, I know, it's amazing.
Optimization. Yeah, it's awesome. All right. Next topic. You know, someone brought up something in a common Slack space recently, and he was asking about local admin rights. And you know, for those of you who might allow your developers, those of you being like a CISO crowd, for those of you who allow your developers, and it could be anyone, to have local admin rights. The way he asked it was like, where in a stack ranked risk register is it? Is it in the top 10? And what he's basically saying is that a big concern of yours anymore? I'll throw in there too. Like, let's take all of the audit findings from 2006. It was local admin rights. It was segregation of duties, massive, right? That's all Big Four built a whole industry around segregation of duties audits and whether or not developers have access to prod. What else was out there from back in the day that people all got in a huff about? All this stuff. The question is it real? Is it something we worry about? Are local admin rights a thing anymore? Do you lose any sleep over that the way you used to?
So the way I characterize this is that certain individuals, certain business groups within business units within an organization have certain types of allergies, and different groups have different allergies, right? So, developers have this allergic reaction to this particular security control, which is removing admin rights. High-speed trading. If you're in financial services and you have a whole bunch of high-speed traders, they seem to be very allergic to a firewall. Okay, so let me go back to. I'll use that example here and say, hey, I can't seem to put a firewall into this high-speed trading environment. What do you think? Is that, I'll get dinged for that because that seems to be like antivirus and firewalls is what everyone puts in, right? But of course, you put in the firewall into a high-speed trading environment, you might as well go home and close shop, right? So in the same way, I think that's the situation with developers with admin rights. You take away their admin rights, they might as well go home because they can't do any more development. So at the end of the day, we have to recognize that it is an allergy, and imposing something like this on top of a business unit will cause a huge amount of business friction, whatever else it might be. And what we have to do is design around those allergies, because you're not going to force somebody who has a peanut allergy to eat peanuts. You just end up with everyone being unhappy as a result.
I think this is whoever posted this probably had to deal with an audit committee for their company, and somebody got this whole thing. Well, you got administrators locally on your machines and developers and everybody, right? I mean, this just rears itself every so often. Here's my advice to people. Fine. Let me give you a sacrificial lamb then. I'll put that in marketing or finance or sales. I'll remove admin rights to those folks, but leave the developers alone. And by the way, the developers will love you if they hear that, and they'll be supporting some of your other security initiatives. So offer a sacrificial lamb, make goods with your application engineers. So when you ask for some help with security, they will be there for you.
Now, keep in mind, the reason why I don't give them peanuts is because of the allergy, but peanuts includes protein. Okay, so if I don't give somebody if I don't fulfill their nutritional needs, then they become susceptible to a wide range of different threats. You don't give somebody enough vitamin C, they get scurvy, right? You don't give them enough. Yeah, you get the idea, right? So there's a whole bunch of threats that they become exposed to if you don't meet the nutritional needs in some way. The question is, how do you meet those nutritional needs, those threats, without necessarily causing those allergies? And this is where I think we as a community really need to have a better understanding of those design patterns that do work for these types of folks. So we all have the same, every group, every organization out there who has developers has the exact same allergies for these developers, right? So what is it that we do to compensate for that? And we found ways, so we grant them admin access, but we oftentimes have them specifically elevate that access on a per domain or on a per use case basis. That doesn't work for everyone, okay, but it works for maybe a good number of developers, and that seems to be suitable. But if you must absolutely give them admin access, then you constrain some other things to meet, again, the nutritional needs that they also have to have as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm taking away from this is that being an effective security leader is all about being able to articulate a risk-based decision like that, right? Because everybody knows what you just said is true, and some of those people have to have local admin. So being able to do that confidently and say, yeah, they do, and here's why. Here's our rubric, our rationale, and why this still satisfies it because of the compensating controls that you mentioned. That's the art that can be challenging for people. All right. Before we wrap up, on a almost lighter note, so I made it out to Sonoma, and Mario's stomping grounds there, and I tried to rope him into a bike ride, and he wouldn't get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4:30 even. So I just rode around his general area, and I was looking at the results, and I was comparing it to people that I know, and Mario, I trashed your backyard, dude. I mean, I just dominated you. I took like 40 seconds off your time on Cavedale. Every road I rode on, I just completely buried you on. So come on, Mario.
I'm just to wrap it up, Jerry. I can't wait to go to Georgia. So be careful, all right? Because I'm going to look at all your PRs, my friend. I'm going after them.
All right, great. And by the way, I'm not even going to mess with your San Francisco work. It's just when you're drinking all this wine up in Sonoma that I can get you. All right, guys, great. Great as always. Thanks for joining in, and look forward to catching up soon.
Bye-bye.